Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney announced how many doses of COVID-19 vaccine have arrived and who will be receiving the shots first. A BC doctor says even after you've been inoculated, you'll still have to wear a mask. And a devastating fire in Taber leaves more than $2 million in damage to a local business.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney says our province's first 3,900 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine have arrived. Kenney made the announcement at the Calgary International Airport last night. He said intensive care nurses will be the first to receive the vaccine. Alberta Health Minister Tyler Shandro says the province plans to give 29,000 healthcare workers the first dose of Pfizer's vaccine by the end of the year. Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health says malls need to comply with the province's 15% capacity cap. Dr. Dean Henshaw says that would include all of those who are inside of the mall in both the common areas and stores. New retail restrictions that took effect Sunday to stem the spread of COVID-19 led to reports and photos on social media of packed parking lots and crowded shopping malls.
For the rest of the month, we all need to make good choices and to rigorously follow all legal orders in place. This includes not crowding into shopping malls or other retail locations. We have implemented capacity limits for a reason. It is essential that we limit in-person interaction and gatherings, including those that happen in malls. It is critical that you stay physically distanced from anyone outside your household, and this includes any time you are inside a mall. We will be reaching out again to operators this week to ensure they're aware of the new measures. And I also want to reinforce these are legal orders. If we don't see compliance, Alberta Health Services and law enforcement are able to take action.
Henshaw says the province has increased the number of peace officers able to hand out health violation tickets. There were 1,341 new COVID-19 cases today in Alberta and 11 new deaths attributed to the virus. Fortunately, close to 62,000 Albertans have also recovered from COVID-19. A doctor in British Columbia has gone on record saying even after you get the COVID-19 vaccine, you'll still have to wear a mask. Dr. Stephen Malthouse, who's been a family physician for over 40 years, says there are some misconceptions floating around as to how much the vaccine will protect you.
And you know that they skipped animal studies for this, and the ones that they did do with animals, with monkeys, for example, the vaccine did not protect them from getting reinfected. So what we know about these vaccines, the Pfizer vaccine particularly, but also Moderna vaccine, is they do not prevent you from getting the infection, and they do not prevent you from passing on the infection. So you'll still be wearing masks and social distancing and all those, I would say, absurd public health policies, but you'll still have to do that because you'll still be contagious. But what they do is they're told that they reduce the symptoms by a small amount. So your nose may not run as much. That's pretty much all you can expect from those vaccines.
Catch the full interview with Dr. Malthouse and Jeanette Rocher coming up in the second half of our program. Federal Procurement Minister Anita Anand says 30,000 doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine will arrive in Canada this week and another 30,000 next week. There is still uncertainty, however, around how many shipments will cross the border before 2021.
When we negotiated these contracts in the middle of August, there was not certainty about whether there would even be a vaccine discovered or whether a vaccine would be approved. We are right now in that moment where a vaccine has been approved, and we are therefore in the moment where we are negotiating the precise delivery dates.
In the early morning hours of December 13th, a shed full of hay went up in flames at Johnson Fresh Farms in Taber. As Micah Quinn explains now, fortunately no one was injured in the blaze, but the damage was pretty extensive.
Joe Johnson says that it was extremely hard to see all of his family's work throughout the year disappear in an instant.
We started storing hay in there in about June. So it's I don't know, it makes you a little frustrated to see something you work so hard on get destroyed like that.
Taber Fire Service got there quickly after a call from a person who was driving by at the time.
And they were able to arrive on scene about a half hour to 45 minutes later to start fighting this fire. You could see it from probably a few miles away. just an orange glow in the nighttime sky. But by the time anyone got there, even the fire department, nothing could be salvaged or saved. Just with how fast the fire spreads in the building, you only have maybe 20-25 minutes to start moving stuff out, and by the time anyone got there, we were well past that time limit.
The cost of the blaze is estimated to be $2 million, but the company's insurance will cover the damage.
Just because the shed was at full capacity, full of hay, and then we did have a piece of equipment in there as well that was destroyed, and then of course the building itself. It was quite a nice storage shed, which makes it more expensive at the end of the day.
Johnson says that the fire is still active and under surveillance, and it will smolder for another 4 to 5 days due to the sheer mass of the Timothy hay that was inside. The family will start the cleanup process in a week, and the cause of the fire is still under investigation. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Lethbridge Police Service is expecting layoffs in the coming months. The news comes after Monday's decision by City Council to reduce funding by $1 million to the LPS. Officials say 87% of the police budget goes towards staffing. Lethbridge Police Chief Shaheen Medizadeh doesn't agree with the decision, especially when there's a need to hire even more police officers.
From a policing perspective, we are stretched to the max, even with 172 police officers, because we have given this information to council. When you look at the standards for other police departments of the similar size cities, we are actually short police officers and civilian staff. So what I'm trying to say is this is not a discussion of Lethbridge Police Service has had it too good, and we are that half police department that we need to reduce. In fact, we are on the other side of the equation that we need more police officers, not take budget taken away from us.
Councillor Blaine Hagan opposed these cuts from the beginning. He says we should be increasing police spending instead of taking it away.
When you're removing funding, you're removing staffing essentially, and so this is really frustrating to me. What was, I think, more frustrating in yesterday's council meeting was that we removed $1 million from the police budget. We gave $100,000 for an art piece at the Nikayuko Japanese Gardens. Now, don't get me wrong, this art piece is beautiful. It's just possibly not the time to be spending on art pieces when I believe that safety in our community should be definitely more important.
Hagan is also one of the 3 councillors who was opposed to an amendment for municipal rent relief, which passed at a recent City Council meeting. $500,000 in additional one-time funding will be allocated to help locals pay for their rent. Hagan says he wasn't opposed to the funding itself, but wanted to make sure a plan was in place first.
I am not against housing by voting against this. The reason I did was because we don't have a plan in place. And you know, being a steward of the taxpayer dollars and trying to make good decisions to, you know, ensure financial stability in our community, it's important to have a plan in place prior to making a decision. And so once we have a plan in place, I think that would be a great program.
The City of Lethbridge has teamed up with Red Deer and Wood Buffalo and sent a letter to Premier Jason Kenney asking the province to not take over the regional ambulance dispatch service. The letters being sent outline that Health Minister Tyler Shandro will not overturn AHS nor accept their offer to pay for the ambulance dispatch contract. The letter goes on to say that the municipalities would rather pay for local ambulance service through municipal funds in the public safety interests of each community. Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman says City Council feels strongly about the harmful impact having the province remove municipal EMS dispatch and centralize the service. Spearman says the city has already approved $1.2 million to continue to fund EMS dispatch. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, it was perfect pairing, restaurants and food courier services such as Skip the Dishes that offer to take care of the delivery services for a fee. But now as health restrictions have once again returned and forced restaurants to close their dining rooms, many businesses are urging their customers to skip the skip. Video journalist Naveen Day has the details.
Restaurants have relied heavily on takeout orders and delivery services during the pandemic, but their attitude towards the tech companies has changed. Mitch Casson, owner of Top Pizza and Spaghetti House, says the fee is too much to swallow.
With me, I look at it as an exercise in customer acquisition. So that costs money. And I've changed a skip customer to a Top Pizza customer, which was the goal to do that.
And while restaurants have been able to trim some of their costs during the pandemic, food couriers, some of which who have been laid off from the service industry, say they want to keep working with the restaurants so they themselves can stay afloat.
We're braving the elements. We brave the occasional bad, rude driver. We are putting a lot of miles on our vehicles just to support our families and try to stay afloat ourselves during a difficult time.
And both Travis and Casson agree having customers delete the delivery apps altogether is unnecessary.
Deleting the app is an overreach. What restaurants need to do is build your own online website, payment portal, and make a skip customer your own customer.
In a December 10th news release, Skip the Dishes announced new supports for Alberta restaurants, which include a 25% rebate on commissions. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
Last summer, former Lethbridge Pronghorn hockey player Evan Wardley organized an anti-racism protest in Lethbridge. Today, he's taking things one step further, partnering with United Way and starting up the Unification Project Fund. The fund will work to educate people about anti-racism and anti-discrimination in Southern Alberta.
The angle for me is from kindergarten to grade 12. I don't think that there should be an age limit on when you should start teaching children about racism and discrimination. If you look at some of the examples for myself, I never learned about any of that growing up here, and I think that's just kind of unfair. I am a person of color. I'm very proud to be a person of color, and I think that everybody should be given a chance to learn about their background, where they came from. And that being said too, I think that people need to understand about how things were for people of color back in the day, and when they say these words or when they make these jokes, and what that really can do to somebody, even if they don't show it.
Wardley says he's looking to start fundraising initiatives in 2021. A Southside Pet Value is spreading Christmas cheer this season by teaming up with 2 local charities to bring presents to pets in need of forever homes. Loris Alexander has that story.
Here at Pet Value, we have done our Christmas tree program for the past couple of years. We ask 2 rescues for dog and cat to bring some pictures of some animals, and we put them on our Christmas tree, and they ask for specific presents and gifts and needs or wants. Just trying to spread some cheer during the Christmas season.
The 2 organizations are Prairie Pit Bulls for dogs and A Better Chance Animal Rescue for cats.
The stores just really want to support as much as they can over the holidays, and they ask us for pictures of the dogs that are a part of our program, and we give them pictures, and people from the public can go and sponsor a pet basically and get different things that are on our wish list for those specific pets.
Generally, people see our tree, they look at the animals, they pick an animal, and then there's some needs and wants that we have pictured, and then you can buy them a Christmas present.
If it's something like a interactive enrichment type toy, it takes the stress of moving into a new home out of the way a little bit, gives them a little bit of a chewing relief activity to do.
Haley says they would like to have all the presents delivered to the rescue organizations by December 22nd.
The reason we do this program every year is it's a small way for animal lovers to give back to the animals in need in our community. Seeing a dog play with a ball is the most exciting thing. Just something small for them, and they are the most grateful creatures.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
The Saskatchewan government is imposing new restrictions on social gatherings for the holiday season. Starting Thursday, only immediate household members are allowed to gather inside the same home, with few exceptions, and outdoor gatherings will be restricted to 10 people. Bingo halls and casinos have been ordered to close on Saturday. New capacity restrictions will take effect at retail stores starting on Christmas Day. The Ministry of Health says the new measures will be in place until January 15th.
Almost everything about this year has been different, and it's going to end with a very different kind of Christmas and holiday season for all of us. Normally, the Christmas season is a time where we all look forward to a break from our work, a chance for us to slow down, and most importantly, a chance for us to visit with some family that maybe we haven't seen for a while. The world always does slow down just a little bit over Christmas and the holiday season. And I know this is going to be different and it's going to be very challenging for many of us.
Search teams combed the shores of southwestern Nova Scotia on Tuesday night, looking for any sign of 6 missing scallop fishermen and their vessel. As community members assisted, they described the struggle to remain hopeful. Pastor Bob Elliott of the Hillsburn United Baptist Church says prayers are desperately needed right now.
Volunteers that have volunteered with the search effort, they know the bay better than the people that come to us, right? So there are a lot of our own people volunteering. There are a lot of RCMP that are here just to support those people. And you know what? We have a combined effort of a number of people in this community that are helping as well. Fishermen look after fishermen. If you're a praying person, I think you should be praying right now.
A leaked story which has a lot of Canadians talking is the fact that the Liberal government allowed our military to train Chinese troops on Canadian soil even after Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig were kidnapped. Political reporter Brian Lilly says many people have a problem with the way that went down.
But it's the military training of war game exercises on the ground that really has to bother people. And when Jonathan Vance, the chief of the defense staff, said no, Global Affairs Canada became upset. They warned that this could upset China, and they were concerned about Canada-Chinese relations as opposed to saying, you know what, good move. They kidnapped 2 of our people. We're not going to train their military.
Catch the full interview with Brian Lilly, who will also talk about the Trudeau Liberals' new carbon tax and how it ties in with the government's new reset. That's coming up after business news. As the votes from the Electoral College were being tabulated, President-elect Joe Biden says the integrity of the American election remains intact. Biden says now is the time to turn the page and heal.
Time and again, President Trump's lawyers presented arguments to state officials, state legislatures, state and federal courts, and ultimately to the United States Supreme Court twice. They were heard by more than 80 judges across this country, and in every case, no cause or evidence was found to reverse or question or dispute the results. You know, respecting the will of the people is at the heart of our democracy.
It was so nice to enjoy slightly warmer temperatures across southwestern Alberta today, and that warming trend will continue. Jeanette Rocher will have weather details coming up next. You know, the average temperature for this time of year is around the freezing mark here in southwestern Alberta. It's so nice to see that we were well above that today. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a full look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, we should see above zero for what, the rest of the week?
Yeah, that's right. And some days we might even get close to the double digits as we look forward to next weekend. 9 degrees, almost 10 degrees. So yes, well above seasonal averages like you were saying. Today, Lethbridge actually was the hot spot in Alberta this morning at 3.3 degrees, which was higher than what we were even supposed to get. Overnight tonight, -2 the high. We could experience some winds, 70 kilometers per hour diminishing to 50. Into tomorrow, that wind will continue, 50K winds for our Wednesday under sunny skies. 4 degrees the high, 7 for Sunday with sunshine. Sunshine and windy on a Friday with 6 degrees the high. There's that 9 degrees I was talking about before for Saturday with a mix of sun and clouds. 7 for Sunday and a high of 0 for Monday under mainly overcast skies. So yes, well above seasonal averages, which is 0 right at that freezing mark. -12 the average low. 16 was our high temperature back in 1962, and it was a freezing -33 right here at 1964. 8:22 was when the sun woke up this morning, and the sunset this evening on Tuesday will be at 4:31 p.m., giving us 8 hours and 9 minutes of daylight as we get closer and closer to that shortest day of the year, which is coming up really soon, actually. Victoria, windy and rainy conditions tomorrow. 9 degrees the high, 7 the high for Vancouver. Vancouver could get about 5 millimeters of rain. Edmonton clearing in the afternoon. -5 is the high, 3 degrees is the high for Calgary with sunny skies. They too will have some wind, but not quite as bad as what we've been experiencing here in Lethbridge. They should get it around 40 to 50K per hour tomorrow. Saskatoon, mix of sun and cloud, -9 the high, -5 the high for Regina. They could get some flurries. Flurries also expected tomorrow in Winnipeg. -4 the high. Now keep in mind with the wind chill, those temperatures could feel a lot more chilly in those prairie cities. Over in Toronto, expecting some flurries tomorrow. -6 the high, -14 the high for Ottawa. Sunny skies. -14 also for Montreal. Now they too will experience wind chill, feeling more like around -17, -24 in some of those areas. Over in Atlantic Canada, Mainly sunny skies in Fredericton tomorrow, -12 the high, -7 the high for Halifax. Charlottetown experiencing 60K winds tomorrow. We're not the only ones in Lethbridge that get those high winds. -9 the high, flurries. Flurries also expected in St. John's. Now, St. John's could experience winds up to 100 kilometers per hour along the coast. They're under a wind warning. 2 degrees is their high. So there you go. That's your forecast.
Today's weather is brought to you by Runner's Soul, Lethbridge and Southern Alberta's sole specialty running and walking store.
Transat shares were up more than 9.5% today after its shareholders approved a takeover by Air Canada. The vote in favor of the takeover took place earlier this morning at a virtual meeting. The Montreal-based company's leadership recommended approval of a revised deal worth $190 million. Now that's far less than the original offer of $720 million before the COVID-19 pandemic began. The deal is expected to close in early 2021 following regulatory approval. The Canadian Real Estate Association says the national average home price was up 13.8% last month from a year earlier. The gain came as year-over-year sales rose 32.1%. That is the same blistering pace as October. CREA says Canada's real estate market is on pace for an annual sales record as pent-up demand has sent sales soaring after COVID-19 delayed the spring season. Officials did say, however, that sales were down 1.6% in November from October as the market settled into the traditionally slower winter season. The Canadian Home Builders Association is happy with the Liberal government's new $15 billion climate action plan that will include welcome incentives for green renovations. The group did warn, however, that regulators must be careful not to raise housing costs too steeply when updating the building code. The government announced a $2.6 billion plan over 7 years for homeowners. That includes $5,000 grants, free Energuide assessments, and a new model code for retrofitting homes with green technology. TC Energy Corporation says it has signed a deal to purchase out the other unit holders of TC Pipelines after sweetening its October offer. The Calgary-based company says the improved offer values TC Pipelines at $1.68 billion US. Under the new offer, TCP unit holders will receive 0.7 of a TC Energy share for each unit they hold. That is up from the 0.65 of a share in the original proposal. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 119 points in the day to finish at 17,506. The Dow was up 337 points in the day to finish at 30,199. The S&P 500 was up 471 points to 3694, and the Nasdaq was up 155 points to 12,595. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 60 cents to 47.59 US per barrel. Natural gas was down a cent to 2.67 US. Gold was down 31 cents to 18.53.33 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at 24.49 US an ounce. Wheat is at $272 per metric ton, barley is also at $272, canola is at $5.97, and corn is at $292 per metric ton. Live cattle were down 23 cents to 112.88, feeder cattle were up 8 cents to 140.10, and lean hogs were up 78 cents to 66.45. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 78.73 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney says our province's first 3,900 doses of COVID-19 vaccine have arrived. Kenney made the announcement at the Calgary International Airport last night. He said intensive care nurses will be the first to receive the vaccine. Alberta Health Minister Tyler Shandro says the province plans to give 29,000 healthcare workers the first dose of the Pfizer vaccine by the end of the year. Coming up, a BC doctor who says even after you receive the COVID-19 vaccine, you may still have to wear a mask. Catch that informative interview with Dr. Stephen Malthouse and Jeanette Rocher coming up in just a moment.
As the COVID-19 lockdowns and restrictions continue across Canada, some say it's too little too late, while others believe it's too much and is making things worse, not better. Joining me from Denman Island, BC, to discuss this even further is Dr. Stephen Malthouse, a family physician. Dr. Malthouse, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, so you've written an open letter to Dr. Bonnie Henry, which is BC's provincial health officer, voicing concerns over the approach that the government has taken to flatten the curve of COVID-19. Now, you believe the evidence clearly shows that the pandemic is over and that there is no second wave, or that no second wave will follow. So can you maybe please explain this? Because the public keeps hearing that the number of COVID cases continues to rise and is out of control.
Well, you have to differentiate COVID cases, which are people that have positive PCR tests. And those could be completely healthy people without any symptoms. And a majority of them are like that. Those would be determined to be cases. Now, normally in medicine, a case is someone who's actually sick. Now, these aren't sick people. And when we look at hospitalizations and death and also ICU admissions, we see that there's been no change in the last year than what we've seen in previous years. So looking at all-cause mortality is the most important measurement. And the reason behind that is because the COVID diagnosis is based on a PCR test. This is where they take a swab from your nose and then they amplify it multiple times. Normally you would amplify that 25, maybe 30 times the maximum. It's a bit like taking a Xerox and then re-Xeroxing the Xerox and re-Xeroxing the Xerox in an attempt to actually identify and match up RNA, which is taken from that swab, with the RNA from coronavirus. Now, if you over-amplify that, which in Canada they're doing 33 to 45 times across the different provinces, then you will actually make everybody positive who's got any little bits of RNA in their nose, and it doesn't indicate that they're actually infective. These people cannot pass it on. So what you're doing is you're finding what we call cases, but these are not really sick people. So if you keep talking about cases on the news, everyone's going to be misled, and that's what's happened. So people are running around frightened of these cases. We call it a case-demic. But in fact, there are very few patients who have COVID at this time. So when we look at what happened in the spring and also what's happening right now, we see that the normal curves, the influx of patients, some to the hospital, of course, but people getting sick, is what we would normally see at these times of the year. There's been no change.
Okay, so what about the concerns of increasing numbers of COVID cases in our hospitals, and that people are worried that hospitals are going to be overwhelmed? So many people feel that this is a very real possibility. So you don't see it that way then?
No, if we look at the number of people, we look at the coroner reports, for example, over this last year, and we see right now, at least up until December the 7th, where we have reports, is that the number of patients that have died from this is exactly what we've seen in previous years. It's a little bit more this year, but we've seen as the patient population, as the population ages, we're going to see more people getting sick. But this is what we would typically see this time of year, and there's been lots of epidemiologists looking at this around the world. There's really been no change. Now, we will see that ICUs get full up and hospitals get more patients in them, but this is what we would expect. This is not due to COVID. Now, if you look at the COVID diagnosis, this is based on the PCR test, which has been completely undermined. We see that PCR test, as I mentioned earlier, because of the way they're using it, it was never intended to be used as a diagnostic test to start with. But because everything is based on that, it's a bit like, it's based on sand, essentially. It's like building your house on sand, and it's very difficult to actually call someone a COVID case based on PCR testing. Clinically, there are some unusual characteristics, and those may help you make a diagnosis, but we never did see a pandemic in the spring, and we're certainly not seeing a second wave now. What we have is the normal fluctuation in admissions to hospitals, sick patients you might see in the outpatient clinic, ICU admissions, and deaths. This is quite normal for this time of year.
Okay, so I'm just curious then, if you're saying that the deaths is actually quite normal, what were people dying of before? Was it just the flu and different things?
Yeah, people die of what we call influenza-like illnesses, and that could contain COVID. I'm not saying there wasn't a disease called COVID. I'm just saying that we're not able easily to differentiate that from other things like influenza. So you may have seen that if you look at the records, that influenza seems to have disappeared around the world. Now you have to ask yourself, why is that? There are various possibilities. One is influenza could be being diagnosed as COVID. And as you know, there was incentivization for doctors and hospitals to label things as COVID. So it could be that we're actually mislabeling influenza, or we're mislabeling other types of coughs and colds type symptoms and so forth. I mean, we do have sick people, and there's no doubt about that. We have ICU admissions. We have some unusual characteristics in terms of lung findings and so forth, and deoxygenation for people that were diagnosed with so-called COVID. But, the whole COVID diagnosis has completely been undermined by the fact that the PCR test is not valid. And that was recently I would say a ruling was made in the Portuguese court that actually threw out PCR tests as having anything to do with the diagnosis of COVID.
Okay, so let's talk about masks for a second there. So wearing masks in public places is now a requirement across much of our nation. So what does the medical evidence say on this?
Well, the evidence for masks is actually that they don't work and they're more harmful than people would suspect. And there are various reasons for that. First of all, we're talking about aerosolized tiny particles. These are 0.1 micrograms in size, microns in size. And so that they actually pass out through the sides and tops and bottoms of the mask. They can actually pass right through the mask in many cases. Because it's aerosolized, it goes out into the air and it can linger in the air for 1 to 3 hours. So there's no way you can contain that by wearing a mask or social distancing. Masks are actually a mistake. The downside of masks are multiple. Physically, they shred, they contain your exhalations, so you're re-inhaling things that are coming out of your own body, trying to get rid of them. And so your risk of getting pneumonias and infections, and what dentists are now seeing as mask mouth, are much higher. And there are other things that would cause that, they shred, so all sorts of particles come off the masks themselves, which can potentially cause lung disease later in life. But I think one of the major things that we need to look at masks is the psychological effects of masking people. If you're walking around in a community that has masks on, everybody thinks there's something terrifying out there that you should be frightened of, and that is not the case. Secondly, they block facial expression, so people can't relate to each other, taking the humanity out of humans. And for children, it's causing damage to not just their psychology from the point of view of being able to properly socialize, but also their ability to read people's expressions and to learn. So parts of their brains will be affected by that. Additionally, we have also seen that carbon dioxide levels go up and oxygen levels go down with masks. That's pretty clearly shown. OSHA in the United States has demonstrated that multiple times. And we normally would want to fit people for masks and all that stuff and make sure that they are capable of withstanding the low oxygen tensions, the carbon dioxide. No one should be wearing a mask for a long period of time. It's very dangerous to people's health and to their psychology as well. And we're seeing that in communities. If children are frightened and they think also they're going to be killers and they're going to kill their family members if they go close to them. And this is completely untrue. So we're teaching children to be frightened of going near other humans, afraid to go near other family members, and being isolated. And this is actually a torture technique that's used by the CIA.
Oh my goodness. I think we're almost getting so used to seeing people in masks that you almost don't even see the mask anymore, though. So you were mentioning, I know. So you were mentioning social distancing isn't effective either then? Talk about that a little bit.
Well, social distancing, keeping 6 feet, is just a rule of thumb. If you spit, it'll go about 6 feet and drop to the floor because it's a large moisture collection, right? But with aerosolized spread, it goes much further. They have studies showing that it goes at least 26 feet, and it can linger for 1 to 3 hours in the air. So you can't stop it by social distancing. Social distancing is just another method like masking to keep people separate. I don't know if you recognize it, but there's an agenda here to divide and conquer, and that's the next layer down. But social distancing is just what's described as a rule of thumb.
Interesting. Okay, let's turn our attention to a really hot button topic, vaccines. So we now have the COVID vaccines that are being introduced to the public, promising to effectively protect us from the virus. A question that many have is, with the incredible rush that's been put on pharmaceutical companies, how safe are these vaccines?
These vaccines are not safe. We have the Pfizer vaccine coming out in Canada, and you know that they skipped animal studies for this, and the ones that they did do with animals, with monkeys, for example, the vaccine did not protect them from getting reinfected. So what we know about these vaccines, the Pfizer vaccine particularly, but also Moderna vaccine, is they do not prevent you from getting the infection, and they do not prevent you from passing on the infection. So you'll still be wearing masks and social distancing and all those, I would say, absurd public health policies, but you'll still have to do that because you'll still be contagious. But what they do is they're told that they reduce the symptoms by a small amount. So your nose may not run as much. That's pretty much all you can expect from those vaccines. Now, when they looked at the effectiveness of those vaccines, they said, well, when we started measuring after 2 weeks, after your second shot of the vaccine, people had less symptoms. And it was 95% reduction of minor symptoms. And so it was described as being 95% effective. But if you include all the adverse effects of the shot itself, which many of them were level 2 and some level 3. We had transverse myelitis. We had some very serious people. We had 4 cases of Bell's palsy. When you add those into the effects that people got when they were later exposed to the natural coronavirus, we see that the number of symptoms that were the collection of the two, the adverse effects from the shot itself, plus the wild coronavirus contagion symptoms, that those far outweighed what you would get if you didn't do anything. So it makes much more sense to actually get the wild virus than it does to get the shot. just from the point of view of what it can do. And it's not protecting you or your loved ones from getting infected. So, it's not going to stop any so-called pandemic, which doesn't really exist anyway.
Right, but is it too soon to maybe tell? Like, I believe they just started vaccinating people in the UK just a week or two ago, right? So have we seen any adverse effects yet from those countries that are?
Yeah, we have. We've seen people with allergic reactions. Now, the thing about coronavirus is they're peculiar. They tried to make coronavirus vaccines after the first SARS in 2003, but they were not able to succeed after, trying for almost 20 years. And the reason for that is because they have a funny thing about coronavirus. It's called paradoxical immune enhancement. So what it means is that when people got the shot initially, they developed quite high antibody levels, and the researchers thought this is great. But when they were exposed to the wild virus, they actually developed this immune overreaction, this bradykinin storm that we've seen with what we experienced in the early part of the year. And then these people, a lot of them got very sick. And this is what they saw with animals, that many of the animals, almost all of them, died in those research studies. Of course, they've skipped animal studies in a lot of these most recent trials for COVID vaccine. When they did a very similar one with with what's called respiratory syncytial virus in children in the 1950s, they tested 35 children, and 80% of them ended up in the hospital when they were exposed to the wild virus after getting the shot, and 2 of those children died. So they really stopped doing this type of vaccine investigation and production in this particular type of virus. This is a very dangerous experiment that's going on right now, and they're using humans as guinea pigs. That's why we're waiting now to see what happens after you roll it out among Canadians. Canadians are going to be guinea pigs, and I tell you, I would not take the vaccine myself.
So you're saying that you wouldn't take the vaccine, and you are a medical doctor. Are you advising your patients not to, or you're just not saying anything?
Informed consent is very important. So I think patients can make their own decision of whether they want to have this vaccine for COVID-19. I would say there's no benefits for it. It may reduce your symptoms a little bit, but it will not protect you from getting infected. And the chances of having an immune overreaction that is triggered by the vaccine is so very high that it's going to be much more dangerous than it's going to be beneficial. So I would tell my patients that and let them make the decision. I don't think I would actually be giving my patients a vaccine, because the first part of the Hippocratic Oath is to do no harm. So I would, I think, be restricted in giving them something I thought was very, very likely to cause them harm.
Now, Dr. Malthouse, are there other doctors that feel the same way that you do?
Yes, there are doctors all across Canada and all around the world that are saying the same thing, but nobody is listening to them. We're rolling out an agenda that is not based on science or evidence. And you'd have to ask yourself why that is. Why would public health be trying to push a vaccine which they almost have to mandate and coerce you into getting if it's that great? It's because it's very dangerous. And if it's an agenda which does not match public health as it should be. There should be a lot of questions coming up people's minds as to what is going on here, because our government, our public health, our institutions, they're all pushing something which scientists and epidemiologists, vaccine researchers, people that have been actually in the field all their lives are saying is not good for the public, and yet it's being pushed.
You raise an interesting point, because one thing that is of particular concern is the move by politicians and many media outlets to shut down any vigorous debate and any dissenting medical opinions on this issue, right? So how can it be a bad thing to have an open discussion on what the best approach might be to handle the challenges of COVID-19?
Exactly right. When you have censorship like this, you have to ask yourself, why is it that all the platforms on the internet, all the mainstream media, that they're completely censoring scientists and doctors around the world? And there's a reason for that, because they have an agenda, and the agenda is to push the vaccine. Now, why would they push a vaccine? Well, it could be that it's going to kill a lot of people. It could be intended to do that. The second one would be that we're looking at passports. Now, passports are a way of tagging you and making sure they know where you are and what you've got. So we could make a lot of money on the vaccines. That's one possibility. The other one is for surveillance. And now surveillance will lead us down further paths. In other words, the vaccine may not be mandated in Canada. Well, I'm sure there will be attempts to do that. But it certainly people will be coerced. By that, I mean that they will not be able to go on airplanes. They will not be able to travel public transport. Employment may be based on having the vaccine. You may not be able to go into public spaces. All those types of coercion will come out, and people will be forced to take it. Now, the other thing is that the attack on Main Street, and getting rid of little businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, means that people will be desperate. They'll have to close their stores because of all these, these artificial lockdowns, which are not doing any good whatsoever, and people being afraid to go out into public and to go to stores. So those stores are going to lose their business, and they're going to go out of business, and subsequently people will be impoverished and they'll be starving. And so they'll do whatever the government says to get a handout, food and a little bit of money. And in that will be have the vaccine and also to be tagged and surveilled. So that's what's coming next.
That is so unfortunate to hear. And I have so many more questions for you, and unfortunately, we are out of time. But thank you so much, Dr. Malthouse, for joining us today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
The first COVID-19 vaccines have started to go from the airplane into people's arms. Ontario and Quebec have both delivered their first shots, and now other provinces, including here in Alberta, will do the same very soon. Joining me now to talk about this and what's going on with the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine is political reporter Brian Lilly, who joins me once again from Toronto. Brian, why are some giving doses to long-term care residents before frontline health workers?
Well, it seems to be a difference of choice, and you see that in different parts of the country, different parts of North America. Both Ontario and New York State, for example, chose to inoculate frontline healthcare workers, nurses, or personal support workers that work in long-term care. And I guess part of the argument, there's twofold. One, as Premier Ford has said many times when cases have gone up in long-term care residences, he says, look, it's not the residents that are bringing this in. They're not going anywhere. It's staff who are picking up the virus in the community and bringing it in. So that's one argument. The other is logistical. So Ontario getting 6,000 doses in this first round of delivery, 3,000 for Ottawa, 3,000 for Toronto. You need to put them somewhere with the freezer unless you're going to use them all right away. And those were hospital settings rather than long-term care. So they decided that they would inoculate the frontline workers first. Quebec went the other way, and they found a way to get them. They're getting fewer doses, but they got them to long-term care facilities in Quebec City and Montreal. But Quebec's also doing something different. And some of the other provinces are doing this as well. They are vaccinating as many people as they can. So they're probably getting about 4,500 to 5,000 doses, and they're going to use them all this week. Ontario is saying, okay, we've got 6,000 doses. We're going to vaccinate 3,000 people and hold back the other 3,000 doses because they don't know when the next shipment's going to come. And if they don't have another 3,000 doses 3 weeks from now, guess what? Those first round of shots, they become useless. You've got to have that second shot. So, differences between the provinces and how they're doing it, the feds not critiquing either style.
Now, even though we're receiving thousands of doses of the vaccine, it may be some time before all Canadians who want to be vaccinated will be vaccinated. Health Minister Tyler Shandro here in Alberta talked about the 3,900 by Wednesday, and then another 25,000 are also on the way.
Well, and that's the hope. I mean, and that's why you've got different provinces vaccinating in different ways. The hope is another 25,000 for Alberta by the end of December. Anita Anand, who's the federal procurement minister, is still saying we're talking every day. And I'm not trying to cast doubt that they will show up, but it's just when will they show up? They're talking every day. They're trying to figure it out, and they're doing their best. So you've got the best bet for most of us getting vaccinated, because we're only as a country getting up to 249,000 doses by the end of December. The best bet for us as a country to get vaccinated sooner rather than later is for the new vaccines other than Pfizer's to come online. We know that Moderna is very close. We're expecting a decision early in the new year. That's part of the up to 6 million doses the feds have talked about between now and the end of March. That's enough for 3 million Canadians. That's 8% of the population. So we need AstraZeneca to be approved, or Johnson & Johnson, Sanofi, GlaxoSmithKline, Novavax. All these places need to be approved faster. And that's the only way, Hal, that I see us getting vaccinated sooner than what the Prime Minister's current plan is, which is more than half of us by September. It could happen. We weren't expecting to have any vaccines approved by the end of the year. Now they're here. We were told it'd be a year and a half at least to get a vaccine, less than a year. So this could happen There's just going to be a lot of hoping and praying for it.
Now, in the middle of the pandemic, the Trudeau Liberals announced a major hike in the carbon tax, which will mean more to heat your home. Now, Brian, didn't the Liberals say that this was something they wouldn't do? And is this all part of the Liberals and UN's reset strategy?
It absolutely is, because we saw the Prime Minister on the weekend virtually attending a United Nations summit on climate change. And he said quite clearly that, part of the rebuild has to be taking strong action on climate change. Well, why? How? The UN has said that the pandemic has shown that we can change lifestyles quickly through lockdowns, and that we need to learn the lessons from this to change society for climate change. That's what the Prime Minister was endorsing on the weekend. He's also said in the last election, we're not going to raise the carbon tax above $50 a ton. Anyone that knew anything about the theory behind using carbon taxes to lower carbon emissions knows that if it's not high enough, it won't work. That's the theory. You charge higher and higher rates, and eventually people say, you know what, I'm not going to use gasoline. I'm not going to use natural gas. I'm going to switch to something else because this is costing too much. You drive up the cost to drive down usage. At $50 a ton, it wasn't enough. But in the last election, the Liberals just kept saying, this is misleading, this is false what the Conservatives are saying. Because the Conservatives said they're going to up it to $102 a ton. Well, guess what? Now they've announced they're going to up it to $170 a ton, a 566% increase between now and 2030. That's dramatic, and according to the UN, still not enough. It's got to go higher. So, for now, it's a 566% increase. We'll see if it goes as high as $300 a ton, after the next election.
And let's see if we go back to horse and buggy. Wow, that's incredible. Now, part of the new carbon tax plan is to not only increase our emissions targets, but to also spend $15 billion on green initiatives. Brian, the announcement came the day after the Prime Minister said no to the provinces for an increase in healthcare funding.
Yeah, and he didn't tell them about any of this, did he? He didn't tell them that we were going from 30% below 2005 levels to 40% below 2005 levels. Didn't tell them about the carbon tax on the call. Didn't tell them about the $15 billion for green initiatives. But what he did tell them was no when it comes to asking for more money for healthcare. The plan when healthcare was designed as a national program in the 1960s was feds pay 50%, provinces pay 50%. By the 70s, under Pierre Trudeau, that was down to 35% from the feds. Then it went down to 14% under Chrétien in the mid-1990s. It went up to 22%. The provinces were saying, increase to 35%. Just get us back to that level. Become a real partner again. This is across party lines. John Horgan's a New Democrat, Jason Kenney's UCP. You've got Liberal premiers across Atlantic Canada, Conservative in Ontario. They were all saying the same thing, and the Prime Minister said no. The next day, he announces $15 billion for his green initiatives, and just this week announced another $500 million for foreign aid for COVID-19. But when it comes to the healthcare system in Canada, all he will tell them during the meeting is no. After the meeting, he said, well, we're open to giving them more money. But during the meeting, he emphatically told them no, and used expressions like, you don't fix the foundation when there's rain coming through your roof. Not sure what that means. It's an awful expression. It's a bad analogy, but those were the words the Prime Minister was using.
Brian, newly released documents from Global Affairs Canada shows that the Trudeau Liberals were looking to train Chinese troops in Canada even after Michael Kovrig of Michael Spavor were kidnapped. Now, the government's response to this was to blame the former Harper government?
Yeah, I'm not sure how you do that, because the key point is what you just said. After the kidnapping of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. These documents were released partly by mistake. There was an access to information request for some documents related to Chinese-Canadian military exchange, and they released a whole pile of information unrelated to the request. Now, normally things like this would be redacted. They'd be blacked out. Instead, these were grayed out. They didn't show, they didn't black them out enough. You could still read what was there. And what was discovered was that General Jonathan Vance, the chief of the defense staff, after the kidnapping of the two Michaels, canceled a cold weather military training exercise for Canadian Forces based Petawawa. That's about 2.5 hours northwest of Ottawa. And he said, you know what, we're not going to do this anymore. The Liberals blamed the Harper government. Why? Because of an agreement starting in 2013 to have military exchanges. Now, my colleague Joe Warmington went to the college where some of these officers trained, and the officials there said, yeah, some Chinese officers did come. That part doesn't bother me so much. Officer exchanges happened. They even happened during the Cold War now and again, but it's the military training of war game exercises on the ground that really has to bother people. And when Jonathan Vance, the chief of the defense staff, said no, Global Affairs Canada became upset. They warned that this could upset China, and they were concerned about Canada-Chinese relations, as opposed to saying, you know what, good move. They kidnapped 2 of our people. We're not going to train their military.
So let me ask you something. What's the latest with the 2 Michaels? There were reports that they were originally tried for spying, but that turned out to be false.
Yeah, I woke up to that news on December 10th, which was the 2-year anniversary of their kidnapping. And I've got a breaking news alert on my phone from Associated Press saying that they have been tried. What? This is, and they're citing a Chinese Foreign Affairs Ministry spokesperson. It turns out it was a bad translation. And so thankfully there is no change, but that's a little sad, as I was writing in The Sun. That's sad. That the best we can say after 2 years is that there's no change. There's very little that I think the government could do now. Early on, we could have leaned on the Americans and said, look, you caused this. We're part of your extradition warrant. We're fulfilling your request. You lean on China to get our 2 guys out. We didn't do that. We didn't rally our allies properly. At this point, I'm not sure that China is going to do anything other than wait for Meng Wanzhou to be released and then eventually demand more things from Canada in exchange for releasing Kovrig and Spavor.
Let's discuss the new bill on MAID, or medical assistance in dying. Now, Ottawa has asked for a 3rd extension on this new bill. Brian, many Canadians have concerns about it, the new bill, which would potentially put vulnerable people at risk.
A lot of concerns being raised by opposition members in the House of Commons, especially from the Conservatives, but also by various senators. And so it did pass in the House of Commons and went on to the Senate just before the House rose for the Christmas break. Now, here's the problem. The Senate will undoubtedly pass some amendments. The deadline for this bill to be passed, according to the court, now this was a lower Quebec court. The government chose not to appeal it. The deadline was December 7th. The government could not manage their own bill to get it passed in time. They knew that there would be amendments from the Senate. They still pushed it through. They still were playing games up until the last minute, and then they turned around and asked for a 3rd extension. So this is not going to end anytime soon. I think the government should have appealed it. There was a lot of discussion back and forth, a lot of pouring water in their respective wines to get the first medical assistance in dying passed, because the Supreme Court has said this has to happen, and they found a way to honor the original court ruling while still respecting concerns that people had about vulnerable people, about seniors being pressured, about people with disabilities. All those concerns are reopened again as they expand who can ask for this. So this isn't over, and it won't be for some time, but there's a bit of a problem here in that the agreement to have hybrid virtual and in-person sittings has expired, and the Liberals walked away from negotiations with the opposition parties to continue that, and therefore they're going to have to meet in person if the Senate passes those amendments. They may have to be called back, and they may all have to be meeting in person unless they can strike a new agreement.
Brian, we only have about a minute left here. The bill that would ban conversion therapy will not be voted on until the new year, and the Trudeau Liberals did bring in some changes that will leave parents worried about their future. Tell me more about that.
Well, there's a lot of concerns about how parents will be treated in this, and will this bill unfairly penalize parents who don't follow exactly to how progressive activists want it to go. This, again, is one of those bills where people of good faith should be coming together and saying, okay, how do we approach this without ostracizing anybody, without making parents potential victims? They haven't been doing that. They've been trying to push it through. They've been trying to use it as a wedge issue. There were some changes made at the last minute, including the way that gender expression was going to be defined. And again, this is not going forward yet. The Conservatives had voted to pass it at first reading, Hal, so that they could send it to committee and try to get some amendments through. That's being blocked elsewhere, so expect a lot of politics around this when the House resumes towards the end of January.
Well, it should be interesting to see how that unfolds. Toronto Sun columnist and political reporter Brian Lilly, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.